Hello friends. Basically, we have first or default and single or default two functionality in the C sharp, and sometimes we are confusing about that first or default and single or default. So in this video, we will see about the difference between first or default and the single or default. Also, we see this difference practically. So let's start with the first or default. So FirstOrDefault is the functionality to get the record from the list of any objects. So when we use the FirstOrDefault, it will returns the first parameter of that object list. Means there are, suppose there are 10 records in the list, and you use the FirstOrDefault, it will be written the first record. Also, if there is a no record in the list, it will be created default object of the that first or default functionality. So first or default and the first both are minor same. Like first or default returns the first element, and the first is also returning the first element. So what is the difference between first or default and first? First or default use like when if there is a no records in the list, it will be written a empty object. But when you use the first, it will be throw the error, because there is a no default functionality in the first. So when we have records and we are sure we have one records there, so we can use the first. If we are not sure there is a record or not, so then that time we will use that first or default. So same thing with the single or default and the single. So single or default and the single will return the single record. So what is the difference between single or default and single? The same difference. If there is a no record, then it will be written that default means the null value of that object as a single or default. Create a default object. So it will be written a default object, but in the single it will be throw the error. So what is the difference between first or default and the single or default? So first or default, there are the 5 records in that list, and the records are duplicated. Like if you have one query for that name, and name is the duplicated, there is a two name John, and we find the records in the list, and there are 2 records. So at that time we can use the first or default. But suppose there is only one record, we are sure there is only one record. Also we are sure there should be only one record. Like we have the primary key, or we have a unique key. So that time we are sure that only one record should be there. So that time we can use the singular default. Singular default is used for returning only a single record. If there is a multiple record in the list, that time we that time we are getting the error. So let's see practically. So here I have added one class, student class, with the property ID and name, and the static data for that student. There are the 4 records. ID is 1 2 3 4, and the two records are same with the name. Like ID is 2 and the ID is 4, but the name property is same with that first name John and John. So John Davis and John Doe both have different name, but the first name is same. So let's see some functionality here. So first I am doing the first. So here I am using the students where condition with the ID is the 5. So you can see there is a no ID with the 5, and we are trying to record the first record of that particular where condition. So first will what here first will be written the error. because there is a no record with the id number 5. So we can see it is throwing error or not. So console dot write line dot name. So let's see what is the output of the name. So here you can see we get the exception, sequence contain no elements. That means when we add this where condition, there is a no elements found with that id 5 and we are using the first. So it will be through the exception because we are using that for first parameter. But we have to use here first dot default. If we want to get the default value of that object, then that time we can use the first to default. So now I'm just changing this first to first to default, and we will rerun this program. And let's see again. So at this time we have the null value, but there is a no exception. So this is the default objects, means object has default value as a null. So this is a default null value. So first or default has no record and it will be returning the null, but there is a no exception. So at this time we can check the first test is null or not, and then we can work on the other functionality. So we get the null record because of the first or default. So whenever you are using that functionality to we have the records or not, and we need to use the first record of that, if there is a record exist, that time we can use the first or default. So we can check via null operators, means we can check via the null condition if the first test is null or not, and then we can go ahead for the next coding. So yeah, so first or default is used for that returning the default object if there is a no records exist. So now I'm just changing that id 4, and we will rerun this program. It will be written a one record. So you can see the record is for John Doe. Okay, so this is the functionality first or default versus the first. Now we will see the single or default. So same thing, when we use the single or default, it will be returning the one element because there is a id 4 is a one element. So I'm just doing rerun this functionality and we will see the output, and that output is same output because we are using the single or default. Single or default, you always use check that record should be one and the id is unique, so it is only one in our static list, so there is a no exception here. Now I'm doing one more thing again. I'm adding the same id number 4 with new name. Okay, so here you can see the id 4 is two records 4, and this is our mistake. Means if the id is unique and we have added the records like same id with the different records, so this is the developer's mistake, how it will be returning the error. So yes, so here is our mistake and it should be it should be returning the error. So at that time, if we use the first or default, when we use the first or default, it will be returning our the first object of this because we are using the first or default. So see the first or default returning the first object with the John, but there is a two records When we use this list, it is giving us the two records. You can see here there is a two records, and it is the getting first record, index number 0. So first or default never give you a error, but it will be returning the first record of that particular list, and means the first index record. You can use the last or default if we use if you want to use that last record, so you can use the last or default as well. So I'm changing this first or default to single or default. Okay, we have two records on this list with this where condition, so now each will be returning the exception. Yeah. Sequence contain more than one element. Single or default use for a particularly single record with that where condition. So this is the thing, single or default versus the first or default. If we are using the entity framework with the multiple joins, and with the lab joins or with the inner joins, and somehow we are need to check that it should be only one record. So at that time we can use the single or default. Most probably we can use that single or default in the entity framework, because suppose we have multiple records with the same id. At that time it will be giving the error. Yeah, we have the primary key, and it will be not it will not adding the duplicate record if we, but if we don't have the primary key and something like that, at that time we can use the single or default. So basically single or default and the first or default have one difference. First or default, if there is a multiple record, it will be written the first record. Last or default will be written the last record. But single or default, if there are a multiple record, it will be returning the exception, it will be throwing the exception. So basically we can use the single or default when we prevent the multiple records. So that time we can use the single or default. And one more thing, we can directly use first or default or single or default without the where condition. So no need to add you the where condition. And then because first or default you can use the lambda exception function exception here, and it will be returning the same thing where we use the where condition. So this is the one coding standard. You can directly use the first or default like this. No need to use the where and then after the first or default, because when you use the where condition, it will be first executing the where condition, and then it will be getting the first record. Yeah, so this is the difference between first or default and the single or default. I hope you enjoy this video. If you want to learn something regarding to C sharp, you can add the comment. Also you can add the comments for your feedback.